In today's video, I show how I started with a rough template of a river that's just wood and foam and ended with a beautiful river scene. Come along as I show you how all of this is done in episode 4 of the Layout Build series. There is a lot to cover, so let's get started. Here we are at the beginning. All of the wiring is done and we can finally now work on the first bit of scenery. We start by giving the wood a good sanding, since I know that I'll be pouring some kind of water feature in the future, and you need to have a smooth surface to work with. Since I'm already making a mess, I thought it would be a good time to shape and carve the riverbank a little bit more. The foam was also sanded after carving and everything was vacuumed up. Now I'm left with a good river shape to work with. To help properly shape the river, I'll be using this Moldacine plaster by Woodland Scenics. I would usually use Sculpt-A-Mold, but I'll be using this because I have it on hand. The goal is to have the riverbank and the river in general flow naturally. Using this will help give that effect, especially along the edges. After it's all done, this is how it looks. This takes about 24 hours to completely dry, and maybe even longer if you use a lot. Here it is completely dry. I do sand down the middle part to help remove any residual plaster. Next up is to seal the entire river scene with scenic glue. Because I am using a resin later on, I do want to prevent any leaks by painting over a layer of glue pretty much over everything that the water feature may come in contact with. Once the glue is dry, we can now move on to painting. To be honest, by the time I do pour the resin, I paint this river about 4 separate times. But overall, I want a dark, mossy green for my base coat, which is achieved by mixing colors till I'm happy with the shade. Each time I paint on the base coat, I'm looking at my real life examples to help guide me towards a good color. I mixed a darker color and I use a makeup sponge to give me a gradual color change. This was mostly an experiment because I do paint over it later on. The reason for doing this was to add a sense of depth to the river, which later I didn't really want / like, but I thought I would include my trial and error. Once I was done, this is how it looked. It might have looked good in the end, but I am glad that I changed my mind. I then painted all the land around a nice earth color. It's time to get some dirt down now. To get a nice shade of dirt, I'll be mixing real dirt that I just sift from my backyard and grout mix. This was learned from Luke Towen, and it works very well. For the most part, I am just eyeballing it, but I am kind of going for a 40-60 ratio, 40% being grout mix. Then it gets mixed up. Before I do get some dirt down, I paint on a layer of water and Mod Podge matte mix. Any extra glue is soaked up with a paper towel. As always, the dirt is applied with a cheap kitchen sifter. The process is repeated for the other side. Before I do glue anything down, I make sure to vacuum up any extra dirt. I spray on some isopropyl alcohol to break up the surface tension, then I apply glue through a small bottle. Once everything is glued, I added some non-mixed dirt along the river's edge. Since it is non-mixed dirt, it will dry darker and will give a nice effect of having it seem like the water has gone up to this part. Here it is after all the glue has dried. It's now time for some details. That bowl on the left was all found outside. You gotta love free scenery. I'll be starting with rocks, which will be glued down with some scenic glue. Each rock gets placed one by one. Some do fit better than others, but I just take my time to choose. This idea is from my real life examples, which has large rocks next to the concrete supports. Here is how it looks so far. I do the same on the other side, gluing down each rock one by one. After I was done with the rocks, I decided to fill in those gaps. And I'll be doing that with this fine dark brown ballast. You can see that I've also added some twigs. I use a brush to help push around that ballast where it needs to go. Once I am happy, it gets sprayed with isopropyl alcohol and then glued down. The following day is here, and you can see that I've added quite a bit of scenery. Not to worry though, because I do show it all on video of how I do it on the other side. The static grass that I'm using is 4mm medium green. And I recently made this static grass applicator from a bug zapper, and it works surprisingly well. In total, it cost less than $22 to make. The bug zapper part of it was picked up at Ace Hardware. The other main component is this $1.25 sifter, the same one that I use to apply dirt. I will link a video of where I learned to make this in the description below. Now it's time to get some glue down and apply some static grass. Here is how it looks up close, and for about $20, it's pretty amazing. I did decide to add some straw grass for some variety. It is crazy how a little bit of grass can improve a scene dramatically. Someday in the future, I will be filling this all in with lots of trees and bushes, but not just yet. I am really happy with how it's turning out, but there's still plenty to do. To add some texture and some difference in the grass, I will be adding some of this blended turf. It gets sprinkled on and then worked into the grass. Pretty much everything gets covered around the grass as I spray some glue to secure it all in place. While the glue is drying, I added some of this dirt/gravel around the rocks. The next day, everything is glued in place and completely dry. My buddy here is yawning like he did all the work. So as you can tell, I have done a final coat of paint before we do pour the resin. I used a makeup sponge to lightly paint the edges a light tan color, and then I blended it in. It's not too noticeable, but I think it will give a subtle look of depth along the river. Finally, it's time to add our water feature. I'll be using Woodland Scenic's Deep Pour Water. But before we do pour anything, I must put up some dams, and that will be done with scenic glue and strips of polystyrene. This is very important because you do not want any resin to leak out or it will be a disaster. I waited an entire day for the glue to dry, just in case. Now for the fun part. This is what's on the box if you do plan to pick this up yourself. So here is everything you get. A large plastic bag, a few pairs of gloves, a couple of measurement stickers, and these will stick on the cup if you do plan to measure out your resin, but I'll be using all of it so there will be no need. Here is all the instructions. You can pause the video if you do want to read a particular page. The first step is to get a jug or a bowl of warm water. Then you want to put both bottles in that bag that was included and try to get as much air out as you can. Then you place the bag with the bottles in the warm water for about 10 to 15 minutes. They do recommend that you tilt the bottles back and forth after warming it up, just to mix the contents inside. Make sure that you do not shake them. To be safe, I do put on the provided gloves. I did forget to hit the record button when pouring it, but here is when I pour it in the cup. You first pour the murky stuff and then the activator after, and then you gently mix for 5 minutes. After 1 minute, I did add some of the murky water tint to darken it, and then I continued mixing for another 4 minutes. After the first round, you do want to cover it up for another 5 minutes. Once you uncover it, you do want to gently stir it for another 5 minutes before pouring. And now, after all that mixing, you can finally pour it. I go from the middle so it naturally flows to the riverbanks. You can use your stirring stick to get those spots covered that aren't getting the resin. If you do get any bubbles, which luckily I didn't, you can carefully remove them with a torch. Lastly, you must cover it all up for 24 hours as the resin cures. "24 hours later, we can now see how it's turned out. Thankfully mine came out pretty good. There are some little ripples, but these won't matter since I am adding more water effects on top. I'm just glad nothing ended up on the floor. Now we can remove our dam. Another thing that you will have to do is cut off that little lip of resin that formed, but be careful when you do it because you don't want to scratch anything that you just made. After a good while, I was able to remove all that extra glue off the sides, and I decided to patch things up with some spackling before I do repaint it. Here is the other side. You can still see that some of the glue needs to be removed. You might also notice that the resin flowed more to this side of the layout, compared to this side, which is much thinner. And that is because my layout wasn't 100% level. So just a heads up, if you do this, you do want to have your layout be as level as it can get. We're now going to add some water ripples, and we're going to do that using Mod Podge gloss. The goal is to have it look like this. And also that bridge that you see in the background is the same as my bridge, just silver, and that's very close to my original inspiration in real life. I apply the Mod Podge with a brush all over the resin. Then with a straw, I blow it around to simulate natural water current. And then we wait for it to all dry. You can see some of it is already dry and it looks just like water. The next day it's completely dry and this is how it looks. I also sanded and repainted the sides so they look like new. We're going to end things by adding some more small details. First are some of these peel and place tufts. They're super easy to use and somewhat cheap. It is a subtle look, but they do make things look a little bit better. Now it's time to add some of these. I do cut them since I do not like how long they are. I did also remove these trees since I didn't really like how they looked there. I will be making some different kind of trees in the future. The holes are fixed up with the Woodland Scenics plaster. Here's a before and after I add some more dirt. I added the bridge back to see how everything looks, and I'm really happy with how this river scene has turned out. There is still so much more detail to add, but I would say that this is a perfect start. And we are now coming to the end of the video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all in the next video.